The dead body lay there for 3 days. We lying helpless on the ground near it, our craving for food increasing continually until, driven to full desperation, wild with hunger and feeling in its full force the truth of the sentiment that self-preservation is the first law of nature. We took our knives and commenced cutting the flesh from the legs and arms of our dead companion and ate it. This was the hardest of our trials.
Emigrants are wandering over the plains in all directions, discouraged and bewildered. Some are striking for the Arkansas, some for the Platte, and others still searching for what does not exist, the Smoky Hill Road. Men leave their trains to search for a road and are never more seen. Others lie down and die and become food for wolves.
The very mothers who bore them would hardly recognize their sons now toiling across the plains, straggling into Denver, hideously shaggy, recklessly ragged, barefoot, sun-browned, dust-covered.
A few days ago, a man arrived at Russellville and reported that his companions, 9 in number, had given up and laid down upon the prairie some miles distant. A relief party was sent out, who found one of the number dead from actual starvation, and 2 others so far gone that they died soon after reaching the settlement. A few days later, a party of 13 reached here, who had followed the Smoky Hill as far as practicable, and then struck across the Platte, by which route they reached here nearly starved, having been obliged to shoot their pack horse and subsist for days upon his flesh.
3 routes will be traveled next summer. The Arkansas by those from the south and southwest, the Smoky Hill by the foolhardy and insane, and the Platte by the great mass of the immigration.
Our wagons had big letters on, Pikes Peak or bust. We had not gone very far before we met wagons coming back with letters busted, written on their sides. All went fine until one day we ran into rain and mud. The wagon stuck fast in the mud. It seemed beyond the horse's strength to pull them out. It was Father's meals that saved the day.
We arrived in Denver early in June 1864, and we were grateful of the protection the small city afforded us. For 1 week later, the Indians were on the warpath in earnest.
There's quite an excitement about the Indians. Everybody is leaving, running on the account of it. A man and his wife and 2 children were murdered there last Saturday.
On Saturday, June 11th, 1864, the Nathan Hungate family, father, mother, and 2 little girls, were found murdered with their throats cut near Running Creek, just northeast of Pine Grove. The ranch buildings had been burned, animals stolen, clothing and other personal property carried away by the Indians. The bodies of the Hungate family were brought to Denver and put on display to stir public sentiment. The outrage that ensued incited Colonel John Chivington's attack on the Black Kettle Indian camp north of Fort Lupton. This slaughter would later be known as the Sand Creek Massacre.
We found the citizens of Denver busily digging out from under dried mud, for Cherry Creek, a week previously in a perverse mood, had aligned herself with the Indians and perpetrated her first big flood upon the white men settled on her banks. There was mud everywhere.
We reached Denver about the 20th of June. We were 6 weeks coming. I recall there were more tents than houses here. There was no law. All disputes were settled by hanging or 6-shooters.
Not far from the massacre site of the Hungate family, and about a day's ride from Denver, there was a cabin located in a peaceful place known as Pine Grove. There, weary travelers could purchase provisions, exchange messages, post letters, and find refuge from the elements. The builder, Alfred Butters, traded the cabin for a yoke of ox to a man named Goldsmith, who then sold it to George Long. Long moved it about a mile north to be closer to the Crossroads of the south branch of the Smoky Hill Trail and the Cherokee Trail, both running in and out of Denver.
As Mr. Long didn't find anything to do in Denver, he came back up to where the roads forked near the Sand Gulch and decided it would be a good place to build a house to feed travelers, as there was so much lumber hauling to build Denver.
Long kept the building's previous name of Pine Grove, but this new facility and stage stop became one of the first of the mile houses.
There was only the kitchen with no windows as yet, and a piece of old carpet served as the door. We were the first travelers to stop there, and Mr. and Mrs. Long had to sleep out of doors as we had their bed. In the night, the coyote chorus kept the dog barking so that we could not sleep, but after a time he quieted down. The next morning I asked Mrs. Long about the dog. She said, "I got up and hung the little devil." We thought it was a most effective way to stop his barking.
The mile houses were named according to their proximity to Denver: 20, 17, 12, 9, and 4. These stage stops flourished over the years as waves of travelers made their way into Denver, Auraria, and the Pikes Peak region. The mile houses provided an oasis for the weary traveler.
George Long lived in the house he built, the 20-mile house, 2 or 3 years, then sold it to a man named Dowd.
One day, a man named George Long stopped at our place to buy a load of hay. Seeing the mules, he offered to trade Father his roadhouse for them. The next morning, Mother and Father drove over to see the place. They traded. Our new home was where Parker, Colorado is today. The house had 10 rooms and a dining room, all spread on the ground floor. It was white frame. With the help of her 5 daughters, Mother served meals to traders, gold seekers, freighters, Indians, and preachers. Beside the hotel, Father had a blacksmith shop and a stable to care for the horses of the stage line. We had a hired man to feed and groom our horses. Our place was called the 20-Mile House.
In the meantime, several other families had come and settled on Cherry Creek, close to the creek just west of the Dowd place. No other houses nearer than Cantrell's, and he had put a sawmill in the timber.
One night, a Mr. Dieterman stopped at our house on his way to Denver. On the floor of the wagon lay the bodies of his wife and little son. Several days previous, he had passed by on his way to Denver to get groceries. He had left his wife and little son in the care of his sister and a hired man. But while he was away, a band of Indians attacked him. Father got it into his head he wanted to go to Michigan. Mother was for staying in Colorado, for it was where she regained her health. When Father talked about going east, she went to town and bought a house 3 miles north of the old place. This was called the 17-Mile House.
Nelson Dowd sold the 20-Mile House to a stage driver named James Sample Parker. On December 8, 1870, Parker established the official Pine Grove Post Office there. He boosted the popularity of the house by offering an ox shoeing hoist. Local mills used ox trains to carry lumber to the emerging settlements and towns in the area. Between 1865 and 1885, the Butterfield Overland Dispatch and Santa Fe stage lines stopped at the 20-Mile House. Horses were changed once a day, and travelers liked to freshen up before making their grand entrance into Denver on their final day of travel. When Parker's daughter, Edith, was old enough for school, he donated land and a building across the road from his 20-Mile House to be used as the area school. He also donated land for the first town cemetery. By 1882, when the railroad came through, travel on the stage roads had fallen away. Parker foresaw this and granted right-of-way for a railroad depot. Mail then came to the Pine Grove post office at the 20-mile house by rail. However, 2 stops on the rail line with the same name of Pine Grove created confusion. So Parker suggested the name Edithville after his daughter. The long name was rejected, and the post office became known as Parker's, and later simply as Parker. Dairying was one of the major industries in the Parker area. In 1897, James Parker's brother George donated the land for the Littleton Creamery, where farmers and ranchers would bring their milk to be separated and sold. The train out of Parker carried a carload of milk to Denver once a day. The town of Parker continued to thrive and grow, the Littleton Creamery being the center of business activity. By the turn of the century, Parker had grown to include another hotel, 3 general stores, and 2 blacksmith shops. Through the many changes, the small post office building known as the 20-mile house stood honored and preserved as an oasis at the crossroads on the high plains.